Hi everyone, I am Annika Jeffrey and welcome to World Deconstructed, where we will break down complex international topics for busy teenagers like you. In this episode, we will be looking at the conflict in Sudan, from how it started to how it has evolved since. So let's get started and dive into the 2023 Sudan conflict. First, a history of Sudan. For much of its recent history, Sudan has been under the rule of another power. In the early 19th century, Sudan was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. We talked about them briefly in our last episode. The Ottomans' rule started with high taxes, which ended up sparking a revolt, and even though the Sudanese people were able to gain some power in their government, their self-reign was still greatly limited. A period later in their history was marked by strict Islamic rule, with the government starting wars on all four borders in an effort to expand, which eventually led to disease and famine when coupled with bad harvests. Then, at the turn of the century, a weakened Sudan was invaded by the British and lived under British rule until they gained their independence in 1956. Even after gaining this freedom, Sudan still faced many challenges. First, Sudan is made up of several different ethnic groups with different languages, religions, and traditions that can lead to internal rifts, especially when one group suppresses another, and it can also lead to coups and civil wars. Secondly, since gaining its freedom, Sudan has teeter-tottered between democracy and authoritarianism, and within that, the role of military in their government. Right after gaining independence, Sudan adopted a parliamentary system, but as the democratizing Western force diminished and the parliament ended up using their power for themselves instead of for the people, many in Sudan turned against it and eventually led Sudan to adopt an authoritarian government instead. Since then, Sudan has had numerous coups going back and forth between democracy and authoritarianism, and between a civilian and military-led government. It kind of reminds me of my laptop's customer service department. Every time I call them for the problem for my laptop, they end up asking me, "Have you tried to reboot your laptop?" While they're crossing all their fingers, thumbs, and toes, feverishly hoping that the problem will go away. Most recently, in 2018, the leader of Sudan was elected by the people, however, was facing several calls to resign after being accused of war crimes, and as the state of the Sudanese economy worsened. A military coup pushed him out of power and instituted a military government with a plan to transition to a civilian government in 2 years. However, much of Sudan did not accept this military government, and after negotiations, created a joint civilian and military council in August of 2019, which was to rule until elections were held in 2 years. Then, in 2021, as the election drew near, the military performed another coup, led by the general of the Sudanese army and other military leaders, with a promise of new elections in 2023. The general of the Sudanese army declared a state of emergency and squashed protests with excessive force. Economic conditions continued to worsen, as a military government led many international organizations in foreign countries to halt humanitarian aid and debt relief. Then, through 2022 and into 2023, negotiations for a civilian-led government continued. A major point in these negotiations was the integration of the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, into the Sudanese Armed Forces, or the SAF. The RSF are a paramilitary group, evolved from a militia into a special military group that has been accused of genocide and other war crimes in the Darfur region of Sudan. The leaders of both these military institutions want to retain as much power as possible, with the leader of the RSF, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti, not wanting a fast integration, as it would rapidly decrease his power, while the leader of the SAF, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, wanting a faster integration, as it would also give him much of Hemeti's power quicker. Eventually, this negotiation point led the signing of the transition treaty to be delayed and eventually led to the start of the Sudanese conflict. On April 13th, civilians saw RSF soldiers surrounding an airbase, which was followed by SAF forces surrounding the RSF soldiers and ordering them to surrender. This created a standoff between the two armies, and everyone throughout the country braced themselves. The confrontation came to force on the 15th, when fighting broke out. Both parties claimed the other fired the first shot. Hemedti claimed the SAF had launched an attack against its members, while Burhan claimed the RSF had started rebellion against the state. Soon after, heavy artillery, such as tanks and planes, were seen in the streets of major cities such as Khartoum. Both sides have fired rockets from residential areas, greatening the fear in the general populace and causing high levels of civilian casualties, with over 600 either killed or injured in just the first couple days. Additionally, though both sides claim to have gained the upper hand, neither side has, and the conflict could still end either way. Clearly, Sudan's conflict took a tragic turn when the RSF and the SAF started fighting. It's like a sibling rivalry gone horribly wrong. I guess it's safe to say that family reunions in Sudan just got a lot more tense. As the conflict continues, more and more civilians are hurt and have their livelihoods taken away. Over the past few months, there have been numerous reports of raiding and looting of civilian homes in large cities, primarily by the RSF. Additionally, 6 humanitarian workers have also been killed, and resources from humanitarian groups have been raided as well, from forces on both sides of the conflict. Fighting has also spread from major cities such as Khartoum and Omdurman to more rural areas such as the Darfur region. And unless the fighting ends soon, it seems that it will evolve into a full-out civil war, with the Sudanese people put in the middle. The fighting has already internally displaced over 1 million Sudanese and led over 300,000 additional Sudanese to flee and exit the country, becoming refugees. Since the fighting has begun, civilian casualties have also risen to 650 in only the past few months. Sudan's conflict has turned into a real-life game of chess, with the RSF and SAF making their strategic moves. It's like they're trying to checkmate each other, but the only thing they're achieving is a checkmate on peace. Now, how has this conflict affected foreign countries and what have been their reactions? Starting with Egypt, Egypt has received the majority of the refugees, which has put a strain on their already weak economy and has frustrated much of their general populace. Additionally, Egypt does seem to be indirectly supporting the SAF. The Egyptian military and the SAF built connections through joint military exercises in the past few years, and Egypt seems to be participating in the conflict, albeit undercover. For example, the Egyptian military has been seen bombing RSF bases, and furthermore, the RSF has captured Egyptian soldiers and released a video about the capture. However, Egypt responded with an ultimatum, which ended with the RSF returning the Egyptians and apologizing as well. However, some still believe that Egypt may retaliate later on. However, Egypt does have several reasons for staying out of the conflict. Though they support the SAF, many others around them support the RSF instead. For example, the United Arab Emirates supports the RSF, but Egypt cannot upset them as they are dependent on the UAE's investment in their economy. Additionally, Libya supports the RSF as well, but it would be unwise for Egypt to upset its neighbor. Egypt has good reasons for and against interfering, which has led to mixed opinions of whether or not Egypt will actually invade Sudan and play a larger role in the conflict. Now moving to the United States. For the past few months, the U.S. has worked with Saudi Arabia to mediate ceasefires between the two parties. They did achieve limited results, such as getting ceasefires for humanitarian aid, but none of the negotiated ceasefires lasted for long, with both parties violating the terms and reports of violence still continuing. The talks ended recently when the SAF pulled out, stating they could not continue when the RSF had violated the ceasefires and that it only responded in order to protect itself. In response, the RSF has stated it supports the talks, even though the SAF has not followed the ceasefires either. The United States and Saudi Arabia tried mediating ceasefires in Sudan, but it seems like their efforts didn't quite hit the mark. It's like trying to stop a water balloon fight with a tiny umbrella. Splash. Since the end of the talks, the U.S. has implemented sanctions on major defense companies in Sudan and other corporations supporting either military, as well as restricted the visas of several unnamed high-ranked members on both sides. However, analysts have stated that these sanctions are unlikely to have a major impact on the violence, especially since Russia and the UAE are unlikely to impose sanctions because of their support of the RSF. Many have stated that this conflict was easily predictable, especially due to the rising tensions between General Burhan and Hemeti during negotiations, and that the international community should have done and should still be doing more to stop the violence, such as military intervention on humanitarian grounds. Overall, the international community's response to Sudan's conflict feels like a game of hot potato. Everyone is passing the responsibility to someone else, hoping they don't get caught holding the hot potato. In the meantime, millions of Sudanese continue to be crushed by their leaders' fight for power, while the international community waits to form a committee on how to form another committee on stopping the violence in Sudan. And that is a brief overview of the Sudan conflict, from how it started to its current state. And if you want to learn more about this topic, check out these links further explaining the topic, all in the description below. And if you want to get involved and make your voice heard, call or email your congressperson and senators. Don't know who they are? Check out the resources in the description down below to find and contact them easily. Have you read an article you don't understand or a headline you want more details on? Tell us in the comments below and we will deconstruct it for you. Do you have any recommendations on how we can improve this show for you? Please tell us in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends as well. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you know when our next episode all about wildfires drops. See you next time!